think the Green New Deal is among the most urgent and timely domestic reform agendas in my lifetime. And in that lifetime, of course, I was very, very young in the time of the Civil Rights era, but I've also witnessed the impact of the Affordable Care Act and a range of other domestic reform agendas. Really, this is the first moment in my professional career where I can see an alignment of really progressive political vision articulated through language, specifically the Green New Deal, in which we were able to begin to imagine change at an impactful scale. I find it unconscionable, utterly indefensible that our culture, with the wealth, the technological superiority, the so-called progressive values, our cultural history, that we've decided not to house or educate or provide health care for our populations. I find it utterly indefensible. The inability of capital unregulated to respond to those conditions has been evident for a century or two. And so ultimately this is a choice about our future. With the idea of a Green New Deal, first and foremost the idea of livable wages, housing, healthcare, education. These are fundamental human rights, but connected through both economic reforms and societal reforms, focusing on the existential threat of anthropogenic climate change and the urgency of adaptation to those conditions. I think it's among the most exciting times I've had in my professional career, and it's so fantastic to see a generation of leadership like yourself and your colleagues really at the forefront of that. And I think it's really a challenge for our profession, for the academy, to respond at that scale. I mean, I'm reflecting, in thinking about the Green New Deal, I'm reflecting also on the original New Deal in the 1930s. Both my parents grew up during the Depression. I can tell you without a doubt that without the original New Deal reforms, both the first passage of material in 1933-34 and the second acts in 37-38, I wouldn't be in this line of work. First generation to go to college in my family. My parents lived through the Depression, and without the economic and social response of the Roosevelt administration and the federal bureaucracy more broadly, and its dissemination of a whole range, a whole menu of programs, I wouldn't be able to be here. In that regard, I think a part of what was successful about the New Deal was that it addressed in very clear-sighted language, addressing economic and societal conditions in a very urgent way. It did so in a very timely way, but it did so through a very flexible menu of different programs and initiatives. In that regard, among the most interesting, I think for our purposes in landscape architecture, was the precedent of the Tennessee Valley Authority. So beginning in 1933 with the passage of legislation through Congress, the Tennessee Valley Authority was created as one of these menu of elements across the broad New Deal. It was originally conceived as a publicly owned corporation. It has eventually grown into a kind of autonomous publicly held corporation. Its mandate was to improve economic and living conditions in the Tennessee Valley. It began with a project in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, which was associated with the Tennessee River, with hydroelectric power, and ultimately bringing electricity to the region across Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky. It had the effect of producing an enormous amount of low to zero carbon energy. It has had the effect of also producing an economic windfall. It continues to produce profits to this day as a publicly owned utility. And I think the Tennessee Valley Authority provides also a model of a kind of zero carbon or low carbon new energy grid model in which landscape plays a central role, because the Tennessee Valley Authority was not simply about electrification, not just about dams and hydropower. It was also using the profits from that activity, both the economic development and tax increment, but also the direct revenue from the selling of green energy, to produce new landscape conditions, to remediate a generation or two of farms that had been really disabused and grown exhausted. And so in that, the TVA was really an instrument, because of its public status, because of its for-profit nature, because of its ability to produce low or zero carbon energy, that effectively changed a region through a landscape lens. In that regard, the literature on the Tennessee Valley Authority in our field exists. It's quite extensive. So in my version of a Green New Deal, in addition to livable wages and housing and healthcare and education, of course we have to talk about decarbonization of our economy. Of course we have to talk about renewable energy resources. And I could imagine dozens of valley authorities, new green valley authorities across the United States, modeled essentially on the TVA from